Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Be the Wolf. We're going to talk about something a little outside the box called your weirdness. I'm here with Dranitsaris. She is a psychotherapist, a relationship coach. She's got a book out, one of many, but she's got a new book out. And we're going to talk about this idea of embracing your weirdness. Because for so many things, you need to embrace your weirdness before anybody else can. And so often we are trying to hide what makes us unique and special. And that hiding will affect your business. It will affect your relationships. It will affect your mental health, your happiness, all of the things. So we're going to dive into that. And I just have to say, I know that you have been a trailblazer. You have done so many things that people thought were impossible. They're like, you can't do that. But you've been a true Be the Wolf embodiment by stepping into those things that nobody thought you could do over and over and over again. And that's why you're here, to share your insight and your perspective.
Yes. And thank you so much for having me on your show. I love the name of your show. One of the books of the 1980s was called Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Yep.
And which, of course, it was really the embodiment of the time of women who were actually coming into the role of leader of consciousness, but doing it behind the scenes and packing together behind the scenes, because as we like to talk about at that time, we had a real intolerance to showing up as anything different than the norm or what was expected of us. But with this hunger to really explore our diversity and explore our uniqueness and really follow our potential, follow our own true north, which it was very difficult back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even though we were breaking free, to actually stand out among, the most people and say, hey, I'm interested in astrology. And have you heard of nutritional supplements as a way of helping you, or natural health or naturopathy, which at that time it was just in its infancy. And so really, to be authentic and be on our own authentic path, we have to first learn to tolerate that we aren't just here to conform to other people's expectations, but to embrace that unique ability, or quote unquote weirdness, that many of us share.
Yes, absolutely. And we each have our own life experiences that have added to our uniqueness. But I personally think we come in with really special gifts and really a very unique and special way of looking at the world that nobody else has. And that, when you can embrace it fully, is the thing that will set you apart from business. In marketing, they're always talking about, well, what makes you different than everybody else? How do you stand out? How do you get noticed? And it is the things that often we try to bury and hide deep inside.
Yes.
That are the things that will set us apart, that will make a difference. But there comes so much fear. I mean, you're a doctor. Dr. Ann will give us some insight. Let's go back and talk about your story a bit, where you started to embrace your own weirdness so that you could find your own true path when it came to business and really cultivating the life that you want.
Well, one of the things that stands out for me, and this happened to me when I was in my late 20s, and I had just come back from spending about 7 years in Europe and North Africa, living there, hitchhiking all over the place and getting into all kinds of trouble. And I came back and I didn't know what to do. I had to make some money. I had to support myself. And so I got a job as a secretary, as a temp working for the government. And I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show that I was doing a good job and I could meet the expectations of the role. And I was pulled aside and told by the manager I had to slow down and stop working so much and stop producing so much because I was making other people look bad. And it was at that point I said to myself, I cannot work for anyone. I cannot, I just can't live in a culture that tells me that I can't strive to be the very best at whatever it is I'm doing. And it was at that point where my interest in helping others and exploring different systems was getting activated in me, and I became a massage therapist
Okay.
at a time when it wasn't massage therapy wasn't really that legitimate. It was more body rub here in Toronto.
Okay.
In Canada. And people would say to me, what are you doing that for? Isn't that rub and tug? Are you really getting into a legitimate field where you'd be able to make money? And not only did I make money, I had a thriving clinic at a downtown hotel. And I became president of the Massage Association. And that was just that was the start. And I realized there that people were coming not so much for my massage therapy skills, but to talk to me, which started me down the road of psychotherapy training.
It's interesting. I think if we follow what is interesting to us, it may not be the thing we end up doing, but often it's a bridge that will lead us to the next thing. And I see that so much where, oh, I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. And all of a sudden, all of those things came to a culmination to work out to be that thing that you feel so called to do.
Well, and it's such a great point because we often think that learning is linear because of the way we've been educated. But I've had many instances in my life where I've just decided, oh, I'm going to study this for a while, apropos of nothing that was going on in my career, only to be able to integrate it into my career at some point. And so everything that has meaning to us will pop up as a bit of an appetite. I have an appetite for learning about this. And it's like, oh, well, you can't because you're working in this field. But we can if we allow ourselves to follow it. And this is where, one of the most difficult things that we do is separate ourselves from the pack, as it were, the wolf pack. We need to come together for validation, certainly, but there's a point where we have to say, nobody else is doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, when you're talking about doing massage therapy at a time where people's perception of it was really the rub and tug. When I was a kid, I would always rub my stepdad's back. And every time I say this, somebody's like, oh, they're getting all creeped out, like it's creepy. But he'd have knots in his back. He's like, you need to do massage therapy for a living. And it was always kind of linked to that sexual thing back then. And it still even is, because when I tell people that story, I give my stepdad back rubs all the time. They'd be like, oh. So, but it takes people like you to just follow that passion and do it and start to set those new expectations of what it's about. And we have to be brave in our uniqueness and our interests and our weirdness to be able to be the trailblazers that I think most humans, well, maybe not all humans, but at least people who are called to entrepreneurship are.
Well, and as you were talking, I was thinking about, entrepreneurs in particular have a particular brain organization that allows them to see that which doesn't exist and get really excited and get other people excited about what they can create. But the challenge of it is that they get really wrapped up in being a sort of a counterculture leader as opposed to an effective leader for where their organization is at. And so if you look at an organizational business growing through stages, it's going to hit a stage at some point where it actually does need systems and it does need a hierarchy. And entrepreneurs usually want nothing to do with that.
Well, because that's when you have to bring in that more detail-oriented stuff. I know I can do the detail-oriented stuff, but it is exhausting, and I have to make checklists, go through the checklist every time so I don't miss a step because I'm a big picture thinker.
Yep.
And like you said, I can see the big picture. I can see where we're going. I can see all the things that need to happen. But those details and those systems are not easy for me to dive deep into. I do it because I know it needs to be done.
Yeah.
And because I've eliminated the fears that are behind why I don't like them, because it's not my strength. So it makes you feel not capable.
Yes, exactly. And one of the other qualities of the entrepreneur is they like the freedom to be spontaneous and don't like having to adhere to the structures that they actually put into their organization. There's a bit of a Peter Pan syndrome going on with entrepreneurs where they want to bring people in that will create the structure and create the system, but they don't want anyone to tell them what to do. They don't want to adhere to their own systems. I'm guilty of that too, because I'm a big picture thinker. But and so entrepreneurs like really accepting that which might be considered their weirdness, because it is a unique ability, that capacity they have to see what isn't there, to see the niche in the market, to see that gap and to be able to fill and sell to it is really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily know how to lead, and they usually want to be seen as this nice guy or gal and one of the people. And when they have to give consequences or manage performance or give an expectation that doesn't align with their image of themselves.
And that's the big thing right there. What you said is the image of yourself.
Yes.
And when we look at and we start accepting our weirdness, some of that means accepting our not so great things and our great things, the things that make us unique, the things that make us special, but owning the whole, accepting not just the weirdness, but the stuff that maybe we consider not so great. Because when you accept those things, the power they have over keeping you from doing things, like you're trying to avoid doing anything that taps into that, or letting anybody see that you're not so great in this area, that when you take it away and you neutralize it, the power is gone. So then it gives you the freedom to actually adhere to your own rules. Because you're not trying to prove something. You're not trying to be seen a certain way, because you accept your weirdness and all of you.
All of you. And, you know, in the past 5 years, mostly what I've been writing about is this idea that when more energy goes into this imposter image, this imposter persona, than actually into accepting our authentic self, our strengths, our limitations, our quirkiness, whatever it might be, then we're so vulnerable to anybody telling us anything or making a real authentic connection with us. And so what it means is that we're actually having relationships with other people with this persona, with this mask on. And a lot of energy has to go into that. We can never quite relax and just be ourselves and say, oh gosh, I suck at details. Will you do that for me? And just be really authentic and human about this.
Yeah. And one of my clients was just telling me how, and she's in the beginning of the program. So she was telling me she doesn't understand how she can be perfectly fine and comfortable one-on-one with all these people, but then she goes into a party with all those same people that she's comfortable with one-on-one, and she is full and riddled with social anxiety. And my response to her was, when you're one-on-one, you can track and keep everything buttoned up of this persona that you're trying to present yourself to be. But the more people who are in the room, the more you have to track, the more you have to make sure that everybody's seeing you in a certain way, and it becomes very exhausting. So as you said, the more you're putting on that inauthentic persona, you're not embracing your weirdness, you're not embracing all of you, then you have to keep making sure that you're seen a certain way. And I think one of the biggest things in business and relationship is that fear to be seen, how it really can sabotage so much of what you're doing, and so much of, as you said, that authentic connection that actually creates the magic that I think we're here to create.
Oh, and that word is such a great word, our inner saboteur that stops us and tells us we can't when we actually can.
Yeah.
And that we lose that ability just to go out and play and try new things or learn new things. And I love to tell this story because I really struggled with this one in my need to be competent and present as knowing all things, because I never felt like I knew enough or I was very smart. And so what I would do before any class is I would learn everything I could about what was going to be taught so that I could just sit there and go, oh, I know that. And it's that defensive arrogance that I had that made me seem really unapproachable. That in letting go of that, I could just go and really enjoy people feeding me new information that I didn't have to work doubly hard at. And a lot of people do have this same fear of being seen as not knowing something, as though we can possibly know everything.
Right. One thing I noticed, because I didn't study ahead, but I'm a quick study because, for whatever reasons, my coping mechanisms was like, track everything as fast as you can, survive, da da la la la. And so that was one of my strategies for survival, was get it quick, understand it, understand what the teacher wants, and give it to them. And so that's what I would do. But what I realized is, because I would track for what whoever wanted, whether it's my client or the teacher, and as soon as I figured out what they wanted, then I would regurgitate that to them, and then I would shut everything else off. So I'd be like, I know, and I'd just be like, I don't understand why nobody can get this, and it's just so easy. And but what I realized later, when I stopped doing that, when I unwound the programming inside my brain that made me do that, was that I missed out on learning so many things because I was just looking for the thing that would make the teacher, the client, or whomever happy. And then I would shut it off. I would shut off my openness for learning after that.
It's quite liberating, isn't it? When you think about realizing what you are doing just to cope and just to survive, so that you won't be judged or you'll be seen in a certain way, and you let go of that and you actually start having relationships. You're not trying to figure everyone out in advance and what they need and what they expect of you. you wait and see what they need and expect, and then negotiate and see if you want to give it to them. And so you actually show up as an exchange between two human beings instead of someone whose primary relationship is still stuck on them set on our what we do is we stay with ourselves. We think about what they probably want, and then we give it to them, and we leave them out of the equation.
Yeah. So when you started to embrace your own weirdness, like you went into the massage and that led you to the psychotherapy, what was the next thing that you really had to embrace that was outside the box that actually helped you do better in business?
Well, that was when I started. There was a point in my psychotherapy practice where I realized that many of my clients were coming because they were having issues with their bosses.
Mm,
And so I decided that I wanted to work in organizations with leaders. And so I decided I was going to be a leadership coach, and there really wasn't any standardized training at that time for doing it. I just decided, well, I could probably do this. And so I started doing that. And the biggest hurdle was introducing emotions as drivers of behavior to leaders who didn't want to have anything to do with it. They wanted to know how to fix their employees so their employees would act right.
right.
And not necessarily have to look at themselves. And of course, my way in was at when I first started was going in with the Myers-Briggs type indicator and talking about personality type and depersonalizing people's behavior and emotions by talking about it in a more systems oriented way, made it more palatable. But then when Daniel Goleman and the whole emotional intelligence movement came in, I went full on into, I felt I had more validation with that and was able to use his work to introduce how fear drives leaders' behavior, how it causes them not to want to manage performance effectively, how they're so afraid of being seen as a micromanager that they stop managing people altogether, which of course creates all kinds of chaos in the workplace these days in particular.
Right. It's the swing from one side to the other. This side is super micromanaging and this side is the like total hands off.
Yeah.
And they're two sides of the same coin. That's the same issue that creates them.
Precisely. They're both driven by fear. And in the middle of that is the development of leadership skills. You know, that leadership is actually a profession that people don't get trained for. Mostly it's the most functionally competent person in any area that gets put into a leadership role, and then they don't get any training at all.
Yeah.
And the statistic I read a number of years ago where on average managers are in roles for about 9 years before they get any training in the US.
It's accurate. And I think there are some businesses, because I think it's becoming more and more realized that you have to develop yourself. Personal development is a piece of leadership. You have to work through your stuff. And I think entrepreneurs do it more than leaders in the corporate world because the bottom line is their business depends on it. And most leaders in a job aren't going to fork out the money for the stuff that's really effective. They might go to therapy if their insurance pays for it, but the really, really great therapists that are going to move the needle for you, the great coaches that are going to move the needle for you are going to require a larger investment than just whipping out your insurance card.
Absolutely. Well, in my experience, what I found over the years is that in the whole context of a leadership team, a senior leader will bring you in to work with their leadership team and not want to do any work themselves. Mm-hmm. But when everyone on the team becomes more in alignment with their efforts, they start to expect something different of the senior leader, and that's when they'll start to work. Mm-hmm. And even with entrepreneurs that if they don't want a part of them to be touched, a part that they aren't willing to go there and open up, they'll do so much work and then they'll go and start something different, start a different enterprise, which fair enough. I mean, we don't have to develop as human beings. Not everyone has an appetite for it.
It's true.
And entrepreneurs really do best when they realize that their business will probably do a lot better without them at some point than with them.
Yeah.
And who's the fellow who wrote the E-Myth about creating an entrepreneurial business and then selling it?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. You talked about that place where they'll develop to a certain point and then they'll switch and do a different business. And oftentimes what happens is they'll keep getting whatever business they do up to that level, and that's it. And they might be frustrated after they do that a handful of times. They might get to a point where they're frustrated. They're like, I don't understand why it's great that I can build these businesses up to whatever, 10 million revenue, but I can't get past that. I just keep repeating the same cycle. And that's when you know that there's something. When anytime you're repeating a cycle, that's when you know there's something going on within you. You no longer can blame your employees, blame your boss, blame your spouse, whomever,
blaming the government. This is my pattern and I'm projecting it out onto my business. My business is created in my image.
And people don't actually realize that your business is a reflection of your mind.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things that's really important about business is relationships. We know this. Everybody knows this. Your network is invaluable. If you've got a great network, it's super important. But your relationships are also, I think, a reflection of what's going on in your mind. So as a leadership coach yourself, a psychotherapist, and you also are a relationship coach, how much do you think the root cause issues in a person's business are the same as the root cause issues in their relationships?
It's an interesting thing because our relationships with our intimate partners in particular, they require opening up to a whole other level of ourselves. And for example, an entrepreneur who has built their business based on being more externally focused, and say their personality is more extroverted, that's their comfort zone. The opposite of what you said about your client, where she's good one-on-one, but right, when she has to be in a group, well, many entrepreneurs will say, I could talk to a room full of people and be totally comfortable, but somebody asking me how I feel and I just want to run out of the room.
Right.
And so we can operate from our strengths in the entrepreneurial world more effectively because they don't call on us to share certain parts of ourselves in those relationships. But it's harder when you have somebody at home saying, you're not sharing with me. You come home and you don't tell me anything about what you've processed about your day. See? And so that process, that thing about being on all day and being in one's persona, and then you have to come home and recover from it. You don't have a whole lot to share of yourself when you're operating out of that defensive structure.
Right. So what I'm hearing is if you can get to a place where you can embrace your weirdness in business and everything else, that you're going to, and just really embrace your authentic self, you're going to have much more energy for your intimate relationship when you get home.
Absolutely. You're not trying to impress. You're not trying to get approval. You're not trying to be recognized. You're not trying to be seen in any particular way. There's no agenda there. It's like showing up in your life and just being you and going with the energy you have in the interactions that you're having with people.
And so On the other hand, too, when you have a super supportive, intimate relationship, that can fuel your passion for your business. It can give you that reset, that thing that really helps keep you motivated. I always say that we have to take time off. We can't be focused on our business all the time, and lots of entrepreneurs are workaholics.
Yep.
You have to take the space, whether it's you just go for a walk at the end of the day and let your brain, as you said, process the events of the day.
Yep.
And if you have a supportive relationship that allows you that space to process what you need to process and come together and support, it can be an invaluable piece of your success, I believe.
Well, it absolutely can. And that would be conditional on whether or not the partner is receiving what they need from the entrepreneur. You see?
Right.
And that supportive spouse who gets burnt out just supporting the tireless entrepreneur. Right. And so we all, if we have an insecure attachment system, whatever form it might take, you see, sometimes it takes way too much energy just to open up and talk about oneself. Right. And building tolerance just to sharing, you see, just to sharing one's story, sharing it without fearing that you're going to be judged or that what's happened to you in the past is actually really embarrassing. And many entrepreneurs they go through cycles of great success and great failure. Right. And if they're too embarrassed to talk about their failures, a part of them is always being hidden, and there's nothing that they're giving to others about the natural flow of being an entrepreneur. It's that withholding and avoiding unpleasant memories and unpleasant feelings.
Yeah. So because of your background, your leadership coaching, your being a psychotherapist, being connected to mindfulness and emotions and all of these things, I imagine that your take on relationships is probably very impactful for people who are leaders, busy entrepreneurs. You have a book out right now. Yes. You want to tell us about that? We'll get into some other stuff in a bit, but I think it's a good time to address what you have for us.
One of the things that I realized in my psychotherapy practice, and my training was psychodynamic, meaning that we looked at how your conditioning and how you were raised and your relationship with your parents affect how you behave in your current life and formed relationships. And one of the things that we were taught and was drilled into us is you never tell people what to do. You don't give advice because you're a therapist.
Right.
And I found that incredibly limiting.
It was one of the things I hated about therapy. Yeah. I was like, I've been doing this cycle all my life. Like, just give me some insight and how to change it. I can only talk myself through this stuff so many times, and now I'm just rewiring that stuff in deeper because I'm talking about it over and over. I'm not having that.
Everything gets connected and explained through, oh, you're doing this because your mother was or your father was. And instead of, okay, well, your parents brought you here developmentally. Now it's up to you. But there wasn't really so what do I do? What do I do if I'm a perfectionist? I know why I'm a perfectionist. I know all of the behaviors. I know the triggers, but I don't know what to do. And so I decided I was going to write a series of books, Become Who You Are Meant to Be. And the first one was In Your Personal Life. And the second one that just came out is Become Who You're Meant to Be in Relationships. And what it has is 6 different symptoms of when you're having relationships from your imposter, your false self, that will get in the way of your satisfaction. Things like perfectionism or over nurturing, over carrying, over personalizing. no relationship awareness. You're only aware of the other person relative to you, for example. And that underlying thing of creating how we can create emotional instability or relationship instability by telling ourselves stories about the other person. Mm. So each of these symptoms has a collection of 25 different exercises that people can choose from. And people think that our development is all about all of these aha moments that we have. And aha moments are fantastic, and they really get us going about things. And then we go back to our lives. And really, if we want to change our behavior, we have to do the work on a daily basis. And we have to do that inner reconstruction or reconstructing our belief system and our habits of mind so that we don't see things through our mother's eyes, or we don't see things through the stories that we tell ourselves and about other people's motivation. And one of the things I talk about in the book is how we have this tendency to decide what the other person is feeling and what their motivation is without even asking. We don't bother to ask them what's going on. We decide about it.
Yep. And I think from what you're describing about this book, that it would be a valuable book for relationships and also for leadership.
Yes, absolutely. Because we do the same thing in any relationship where we don't feel secure. It will generate some degree of anxiety, and we'll either, if we're a leader, leaders say things like, "Oh, they're not one of us," or "They're not my kind of people," or
Right.
"They're the problem," or simply because they don't know how to engage or lead different people that are different from them. They like people who are like them,
Right.
and have the same orientation. And so in really getting to know people and understanding what drives them and what their needs are, they can relate to that person and not their idea of what they should be like.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, okay. So now tell me another thing where you started bringing in emotions to deal with your leadership people, to deal with entrepreneurs, to help them realize that fear is the root of what's in their way.
Yes.
And when did that start to take hold? When did it start to be more accepted? Or did you have to, you packaged it in the Myers-Briggs and probably some DISC and some other personality things. So you packaged it in that way so that you could open the door. And that's such a way that we need to deal with our weirdness and get people to like it. We have to become marketable on some levels. So we've got to package it in a way that can open the door. But what was the next thing that really you started embracing, what you really understood to help entrepreneurs and help people in relationships move forward that maybe needed a little marketing package?
It was probably when I started incorporating mindfulness, and that was around 2007 when I took this. It was just a weekend course I took on mindfulness and psychotherapy, and it was another one of those, wow, putting Buddhism and psychotherapy together. Isn't that fascinating? And so then I did a program that was offered by the University of Toronto on the mindfulness-based stress reduction program.
Mm.
And so I started integrating that into programs for leaders. Reducing stress, developing resilience, going down that stream of the brain is more productive when we are not catastrophizing about all of the things that could possibly go wrong. And work-life balance is not about 8, 8, and 8.
Right.
8 work, 8 family, 8 sleep. It's about whatever it means to you, but that you get enough time for your sympathetic nervous system that puts out to be restored into balance by having enough rest and relaxation where you're not doing. And being in the present moment allows the brain to focus itself so that it doesn't expend as much energy. And leaders love that. Want to know how to make your brain more efficient?
Right.
Practice mindfulness. Want to increase productivity? Practice mindfulness. And so it's putting it in their language to get it into programs for leaders was probably that next hurdle for me.
Exactly. I remember when I started meditating years ago, and I would meditate 2 hours a day. And people were like, how do you have 2 hours a day to do anything? Like, ah. And I said, well, this is the weirdest thing. I will wake up in the morning and I will meditate for 2 hours a day. And somehow I get way more done than if I don't meditate for 2 hours a day. It's unreal. But one of the things I want to speak to for those of you who are listening, the reason why stress is a productivity killer is because when you are stressed, you're in these contracting emotions and your brain literally cannot access anything creatively. It can only access what you already know. And so therefore you cannot see any possibility. You cannot see a new opportunity. So if it is in a moment where it's life and death in this moment, yes, fine. Deal with what you know. You don't want to be off. Well, maybe if I did this, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to be off in la la land. Well, the saber-toothed tiger is running after you. But when you're trying to solve a problem, a work-related problem, a business-related problem, you need access to your creative brain. Because if you keep doing the same things you already know how, you're going to keep creating the same problem. And we've all heard the saying, to get something different, you need to do something different. And when you are stressed, you literally cannot access your creative brain, period. And then you're going to repeat the same cycles. You want to talk about efficiency. You're going to keep repeating the same cycles, creating the same problems over and over and over again. So what I always say, one of the number one most important things an entrepreneur, a leader can do is to deal with your stress, manage your stress, get your system to a place of neutrality before you make any decisions, before you try to problem solve. And that will save you mountains and mountains of time, energy, and money and effort.
Very, very wise. Most people don't really understand the mechanics of the mind and aren't particularly interested and will describe themselves as, well, that's just the way I am and I can't change that and don't try and change me. But if you look at brain efficiency, to your point, the brain is really energy efficient. It just wants to do what it's always done. And that's why doing something like a meditation practice, don't do 20 minutes, do 10 minutes, do 5 minutes, do what you can and build up to it, as opposed to trying to force something that doesn't feel natural to the brain and encounter so much resistance that you tell yourself, I can't do that, and you shut the whole thing down. It's like, okay, well, you can't do that. What can you do? What will you do? What are you willing to do to change these neural pathways in the brain that are causing you to create the same distress, the same patterns, the same problems that you have had for years and years?
Right. And one last thing I want to say about stress, a lot of people, stress is their comfort zone.
Yep.
And we're always saying, get out of your comfort zone. So if stress is your comfort zone, if it is the way you operate most of the time, probably the best thing you can do for your business is to literally get out of that specific comfort zone. We don't think of stress as comfort, but if it's where you live and have been living for years, it's your comfort zone.
It truly is. And the brain is set to being hypervigilant and hyper-reactive. And for the past few years, I've been going back to the theme of the 60s and 70s. I've been talking to people about, what are you doing to create inner peace? Because it's our inner zone and what our brains are doing is creating so much emotional distress when we're not directing our thoughts to where we want them to go. And this is where I talk too about what multitasking will do to the brain when you think you should be multitasking. And all it does is split your focus in a way that renders you less productive and stresses the brain more than if you just decided to exercise a little executive function and just manage and focus yourself on one thing. So really that combination of emotional intelligence and mindfulness, it takes a little bit of the woo-woo out of bringing in a mindfulness practice, which of course isn't just about meditating. You can practice mindfulness when you're washing the dishes.
Yeah.
You can do it anytime when you notice that your brain is in a different place than your body. And it's all about alignment. And the more, as a leader in particular, the more you get yourself into alignment, the more it comes natural to bring all of the performance of your employees into that same type of alignment.
Well, and you have spent years bringing the weirdness to the forefront, bringing the mindfulness, the emotions. And yes, sometimes we had to package it in another thing for people to get to take a bite of it.
Yes.
But again, as we embrace those things that we inherently know within ourselves, those pieces that are our true, authentic self, when we take the steps to be the trailblazer, to do that, here we are 20 years later, almost 20 years later, and those things are becoming more and more mainstream. And it happens because people listen to themselves and went out on the limb to be weird and bring it to the world in however they brought it to the world. And that creates progress. It is a piece of my statement I always say at the end is, when you unleash the power of you, humanity evolves. And this is a prime example of exactly what I mean by that. So, Anne, where do people get your book?
All of my books are available on Amazon.com and Amazon.ca if they happen to be in Canada. Very easy to access any of them.
Okay, I'll put a link also in the show notes for your new book and website. Any other ways you want people to get in contact?
Or Dranitsaris.com is my individual and relationship coaching website, and Caliber Leadership for all things organizational. And I also have a YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard, that I have with my business partner and daughter. We have, I think well over 500 different videos for people where we share insights and information about personality type in the brain and attachment and organizational dysfunction.
Great. So if the things that Dr. Anne has been saying today, I want you to open up your browsers, get into the YouTube, get into the websites, Caliber Leadership.
Yes, caliberleadership.com.
And then Dranitsaris.com.
Yes.
So open up the browsers. And also, you all know, or maybe you don't, if this is the first time you've been listening, I have a guide for you called Grow Your Business and Have Fun Doing It, with the 3 secrets the business gurus never talk about. You can grab that at BeTheWolfGift.com. And is there any words of wisdom you would like to leave our audience with today?
I have this idea about when we start to integrate all of the elements of ourselves, there's a sense of that we're coming home to ourselves, that we've been living outside of ourselves, or over-focused on externals. And truly, I invite people to explore what that topic of what it means to come home to you, and remembering who you are, and taking that as a first step to making any changes that you might want to make in your life in a holistic way.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. Wonderful conversation.
I know. I feel like we could go on for a really,
Yeah.
really long time. Okay, everybody. And remember, of course, when you unleash the power of you, humanity evolves. We'll see you all next time on Be the Wolf. Bye.